the implications of this settings rule. As always, we'll go over the COVID data, and then quickly at the beginning, we're going to have some brief updates just about our Medicaid recertification process, as well as participant-directed services. So I will just first walk through the COVID data. As of yesterday, we were up to 810 people supported by DDA who have contracted COVID. In the month of June, there's been only one thus far. In the month of May, there were two. So things have still been going along. Well, I hesitate to say it, but things are going well in that regard. I hope that, in spite of the fact that it is absolutely true, the numbers are way down, that doesn't mean that people should forget about the need to follow up with your doctor about what current boosters are required for you. Because while we have very low numbers, COVID is still a very real thing. So in the different kinds of placements supported by DDA, in terms of COVID infections to date, 1 person in a correctional facility, 24 in host homes, 153 in intermediate care facilities, 1 in a mental health facility, 182 in their natural homes, 2 in nursing homes, 7 in out-of-state placements, 62 in residential habilitation, and 378 in supported living. People who have contracted COVID, who have required hospitalization. We have not had anyone who has had COVID that required hospitalization for treatment since December of 2022. And in terms of people who have died from, who have had a confirmed COVID death, the last one was in September of 2021. So next up, and I'm just reading down the list of people in order here, Shauna Holmes with DDS is our, I won't try and come up with a specific title of your position, sorry. But we'll do a brief presentation today. We do have some folks in the pipeline to receive participant-directed services, and Ms. Holmes will talk to us some about that.
Good morning, Andy. Good morning, everyone. We'll actually start with the roles of Medicaid waiver specialists, and then I'll tap on the end just to give a quick blurb about participant-directed services. Again, I'm Shauna Holmes, the PDS program coordinator here at DDS.
Hello, my name is Greg Kaufman, and I am a waiver specialist. And so I will be going over what we do as Medicaid waiver specialists at DDA. Next slide. So we enroll persons in the intellectual and developmental disabilities services waiver, as well as the individual and family supports waiver. And all of those waivers comprise the home and community-based services waiver. What we do is we look at the person's ISP, we get requests from service coordinators, and we approve those requests for HCBS services in the ISP. Those approvals are approvals of service authorization requests. We also complete renewals, Medicaid renewals for persons enrolled in HCBS. So on a 12-month cyclical basis that coincides with the person's ISP start and end date, we renew the Medicaid for that person. We do that by entering a LOC, level of care, an LTC, and a Form 50B into the partner portal. And that is operated by Department of Healthcare Finance and the Economic Security Administration. So ESA has 45 days to review an initial waiver package or the renewal and make a determination. The waiver staff checks the partner portal daily to provide updates to service coordinators for newly enrolled persons so that we can get those persons into the services and supports that they need expeditiously. Non-waiver persons are responsible for renewing their own Medicaid and will receive notification from the Department of Healthcare Finance. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for listening to my part of the presentation.
Hold on. This is Thomas. I do have a question though. Cause people keep telling me or calling me, talking about my Medicaid going to change. I got to get it renewed. And I don't know whether not to trust somebody that might call me or trust a commercial. So how do I find out about whether or not I got to get renewed?
Well, Mr. Mangrum, you could always call the Department of Disability Services. You could request that your service coordinator reach out to the Medicaid waiver unit, and we will be more than happy to let your service coordinator know whether it is in fact time for your services to be renewed.
Okay, I'm gonna call my case manager today, and I'm not gonna have much time to really talk on things because I'm packing because I'm getting ready to go to South Carolina. My sister passed away, so I'm going for a funeral. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Hey, Greg, there is
Yes.
a question in the chat saying,
Okay.
just to clarify, the Medicaid unit also does renewals for people getting in-home support, not just residential support.
That is correct, because the people who are getting in-home supports are participants in the HCBS waiver. Okay, if there's no
Thank
further.
you. I don't. Others. Thanks a lot, Greg.
All right, you're welcome. Bye.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Again, we'll jump into just a quick blurb. Again, my name is Shauna Holmes. I'm the Participant Director Services Program Coordinator here at DDS. I just want to briefly talk about the implementation of the program, the services that are offered within the IFS waiver that can be self-directed. Again, as Andy spoke on, we have a few participants who are already in the pipeline, ready to be moved over and work with our fiscal management agency, GT Independence. Next slide, please. I'm just going to quickly go through the services that are offered underneath the My Life, My Way program, which is our participant directed services program here at DDS. On the screen here, you see a list of the first three, which are respite, that's offered 30 days per budget year, companion services, one-to-one, individual day supports, one-to-one, that is offered on a 30-hour per week max, companion services offered on a 40-hour per week max, 8 hours a day. Next slide, please. And our last two services are in-home supports. The amount and limit is based upon the allowable amount in the budget. Again, the My Life, My Way program, IFS waiver, participants, whether you are self-directing services through My Life, My Way, or if you are the participant chooses to have traditional services, the cap for that program is $75,000. Along with the My Life, My Way program, we do have an additional service called individual goods and services. which is a limit within that $75,000 of $2,500 that can be applied towards goods and or services to assist the participant in gaining sufficiency and independence within the home, the community, and assist them with independence throughout their tenure here in the program. If there are any questions or you have participants that are interested in the program, please have them reach out to their service coordinator so that they can complete the pathway tool. We can get them geared up and ready to go if they're interested in the My Life, My Way program. We thank you for your time.
So there is one question here regarding
Yes.
PDS that
Mhm.
says, I heard someone asked for PDS a few weeks ago and was told it was not up and running just yet.
Mm.
And it's been up and running since the end of April, correct?
Yes, you are correct, Andy. And so I'm not sure where they're getting that information, but Sandy.
Can you put your contact information
sure,
in
that
the
is
chat?
exactly
And
what
that
I
way,
was
if
gonna do.
anyone says it's not up and running,
Please
send
let me
them
know.
to Ms. Holmes.
All right,
She
I can
will
pass it
educate
along to the person. It was a parent, pretty knowledgeable parent who was told that. So yeah, I can pass along your contact information. That would be great.
Thank you, appreciate that.
And we did have another question for Greg. If he's not still here, I think we can handle it as well. The renewal forms for people with in-home supports are coming to their homes. Should families forward those back to DDS? No, the families are responsible ultimately for applying for Medicaid or for doing the Medicaid recertification for the person in their family. However, our service coordinators support them through that process. So they should not send those back, but they should, when they have them, reach out to their service coordinator for any support they need in completing them. Any other questions? Thank you. So next up, we have, I believe we have Sandy and Roger, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and I believe someone from DDS is handling the slides. Hopefully that's correct.
Charlisa, is that you?
Or I could share them.
One moment.
I assume then I'll just say next slide. Since I won't have the power.
You should have. Can you all see my screen?
That was a PowerPoint that I did one of my last.
Yes, I can see it.
forums. I could do it again, but we're here to, the settings rule one. It's on DDS's PowerPoint. It's red and white.
Sandy, do you have the share option showing up at the bottom of your screen?
I do, but Roday has the
Yeah.
final
So
PowerPoint.
can you give me the
I was told I was not
share
gonna-
option? It says host disabled participant screen sharing. And
I
I
just sent it.
You
to
should have it.
Charlisa, I just sent it.
Okay.
I think, yeah. Oh, okay, Rhoda, sure.
Awesome, that is it. Okay, everybody. Hello, everyone. I am Sandy Bernstein, the Legal Director at Disability Rights DC at University Legal Services. We're the Protection and Advocacy Program for people with disabilities in the District of Columbia. And today I'm going to present with Rhoda about the home and community-based settings, the Home and Community-Based Services Settings Rule, which is a federal rule from the federal agency CMS. So I don't think I can move it forward. So if someone could hit the next slide, that would be great. Great. Okay, so here, some of you may be very aware of the settings rule. Some of you, this may be new information. But the settings rule was created by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, which is a federal agency. And it issued something called the settings rule in January 2014. So it's been several years. The purpose of the rule was to ensure that people with disabilities who are getting home and community-based waiver services. So in DC, that's the IDD waiver, that's the IFS, the Individual and Family Support Waiver, and it's also the EPD waiver that is another waiver that's not operated by DDS. And it's to make sure that people who are getting waiver services actually are truly getting community-based services and are getting all the benefits of community living, and their services are truly in the most integrating setting possible. And the reason this rule was created, that the federal government did so, is there was concern that some states and providers were using waiver money, which is federal money, that was supposed to be used for community-based supports to pay for services that were still really too institutional in nature, whether or not there were people actually living in the community, but they didn't have the rights as somebody who was not receiving waiver services, like myself. Or maybe they were actually placed like a group home on the grounds of an institution. So that's not a community setting. So the settings rule was put in place to make sure that if the federal government was going to pay for waiver services, that people were truly getting the community-based services that they're entitled to. Okay, next slide. So to do so, what DC and all other states had to submit plans to CMS saying how they would comply with this rule. Saying whether or not they had to change their services, whether or not they had to change policies and regulations, whether they had to move some provider placements. And DC did present a plan to CMS, and it was approved. And the transition plan for implementing all of the settings rules requirements ended in March 2023. So just in this year. And now all states, including DC, must be in compliance with the settings rule. Next slide. And so the settings rule really, and we'll get into all the details in a minute, but it really does is it protects the rights of people receiving waiver services, which is most of the people who receive services from DDS get services from the home and community-based waiver, and make sure that they're able to make their own choices. They control their life. They control their access to community resources. Really, they're no different than anyone else who's not receiving waiver services. The settings rule also requires states to have a person-centered process for planning for these services. So what does that mean? That means that individuals who are receiving waiver services, so if you're receiving waiver services, your family members are, you're a provider supporting somebody, it's the person who should be directing the planning process. And the plan should really reflect what is important to them. What are their preferences? What do they like? What do they want to do? How can they control their life? And how can they truly be engaged in their community?
Excuse me.
You want to ask a question now, Thomas? Sure.
No, I just want to add something to that. When it comes to making sure people actually getting out and they're doing things, to make sure the money that's set aside to make sure that people is not using people with disabilities as an excuse not to do nothing because they're lazy or what have you. And making sure people with physical disabilities is actually getting out there like everybody else. Thank you.
Right, Thompson, I'm very sorry to hear about your sister. And thank you for contributing. Yeah, that's right. That everyone, whether they have a physical disability, a significant cognitive disability, everyone should be getting out in the community and enjoying their lives. And
yes.
if you could do move to the next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the rights that are under the settings rule. There are a lot of very significant rights for people who are in waiver housing. And so for us with DC and the Department of Disability Services, that means people who are living in supported living. So a lot of people who are living in apartments and small homes, to people who are living in residential habilitation, which are look more like group homes, for people living in host homes. The housing options that are available under DDS's waiver. And what the settings rule says is that anybody who's placed in a waiver placement, so in housing that's funded through the waiver, they must have a written lease with a landlord or some type of residency, I don't know, I can't say that word today, a residential agreement with your residential provider that states your rights and responsibilities. So what's best is to have a written lease with a landlord. But it may be that there are certain situations where a lease is not, you're not able to get a lease. Maybe the landlord says, oh, Sandy, you only get SSI and the rent is too expensive. So you don't have enough income for me to put you on the lease. And so DDS or the provider ends up being on the lease. If that's the situation and the person doesn't have a lease, that doesn't take away any of their protections. And so they would have to, if I'm served by RCM and I can't get a lease, then RCM and I would have a residential agreement that lays out my rights and responsibilities where I'm living. And what the settings rule says is that people living in waiver placements or living in these residential homes have to have the same rights that people do in the state if they were living in non-waiver homes. So just say I'm living in the Fort Taunton apartments and I don't have a disability. The person next door to me is receiving services from DDA through the waiver. That person needs to have the same rights that I do in that apartment building. The same rights for eviction, even if they don't have a lease, that their residential agreement has to specify their rights. And for those of you who are unaware, just are unfamiliar with the word eviction, it just means that the landlord can say you have to get out because you haven't followed the rules. Maybe you're being too loud and there are rules about noise. Maybe you haven't paid your rent. And the landlord can take steps to evict you and a provider can take steps to discharge you, but you have those rights to make the same rights you would as if you weren't living in a waiver home. So for example, in DC, landlords cannot just evict you for not paying rent right away. They actually have to send you a notice and tell you what you did wrong and offer you the opportunity to fix it. And then they have to file something in court if they actually want to kick you out of your housing. So that same rule would apply to somebody who had a residential agreement with their provider. They can't just say, you know, Sandy, you haven't paid your rent, it's time for you to leave. There would have to be a similar process and the person would have similar rights. In addition, your landlord or your residential provider may also need to make reasonable accommodations that you may need because of your disability, or may need to allow you to make accessibility changes to your housing yourself. For example, just say you live in an apartment building and you use a wheelchair for mobility and there's parking in the apartment building and it's unassigned. And there's only a couple of spots that are actually accessible where you can get to your housing. And every time you come home, you find out that, oh no, those spots are taken. You can ask as a reasonable accommodation that they set aside a parking spot that's for you and is not for everyone else because you need that for accessibility. Or if you live in an apartment building or house and you realize that you need some accessibility changes, maybe you need grab bars, maybe you need a ramp put in, maybe you need other changes made. It may be that your landlord or your residential provider has to do that. It may be that you have the right to do that yourself and they don't have to pay for it. And that differs. And that's, but you have the same rights as somebody else who is living there and not receiving waiver services. That's the important part. If you could move to the next slide. Okay, and we just have a couple places that you can go if you have any questions, because housing law is complicated. Housing rights are complicated, whether you just live in a waiver home or you live in another home. And so here are some places that you can contact. If you have questions about your DDA housing and about any concerns you have about your rights, you can first contact your service coordinator or your residential provider, or any members of your support team. If you work with an advocate, you work with an attorney, you have a family member or friend that's part of your support team, reaching out to them. You can also reach out to the rights and advocacy specialists at DDS, and we provided their email and telephone number. If you are concerned that your rights are being violated, you also can file a complaint and go through the complaint process, which we've listed the number here. And additionally, you can contact the DC office of the tenant advocate, and we've listed the number here. You certainly can also call my office, and I can put that number in the chat if you have any questions about your rights in housing, especially as it relates to the settings rule. Go to the next slide. Okay, another important right that the settings rule has provided people is the right to privacy in their homes. We're going to get to, Rodé is going to get to after I finish, the situation where someone may have what's called a person-centered modification. That is something that Rodé will explain, and that may affect your rights to privacy. But putting that aside, people generally do have a right to privacy in their waiver home. And I should be clear about this. If you receive waiver services, just say I live alone or I live with my sister, and I receive in-home supports. These rules don't make my sister follow these rules. These rules all do not apply to people who live in what's called a natural home or a family home or their own home. This is for people who live in waiver provided home that is provided by DDS and a provider. So hopefully if you're living with your sister or a family member, of course they respect your rights, but the federal government doesn't control what family members do. So what is the right to privacy? You have the right to be alone in your bedroom and the bathroom, away from staff and other residents. So if you want to be by yourself and they say, come on, we're all playing a game, and you say, I just want to be alone, they need to leave you alone. Bedroom and bathroom doors must have locks, and you have the right to lock them when you're alone. And staff members who are authorized to assist you may have keys and unlock those when you need assistance. But if not, you are allowed to lock the door to have some privacy. In that realm, you also, we don't have this on the PowerPoint, but I want to make clear, you also should be given a key to your house, whether it's an apartment or a home, because you also have the right to obviously lock your apartment and also enter your apartment on your own without staff assistance. And if staff ever are coming to your room, whether it's locked or not, they should certainly obtain your permission before entering your bedroom, and certainly also before you enter your bathroom. If you can do the next slide, please. Okay, more privacy. You have the right to keep your personal belongings in a secure place, and that's whether or not you're in a residential setting, like an apartment and supported living, or you're at your, just say you were getting rehabilitation, or you're have a space where you get IDS services. If you go to a day program or you're in supported employment, they have to provide you with a secure location where you can keep your belongings. That's also required under the settings rule. So it's not just residential. In terms of residential, again, the settings rule would say that you have the right to choose your roommate. Now that is subject to some restrictions. You may have to look to DDS's vacancy lists. They have a list where they have openings, for example, in supported living. And so you may be limited on what's available. However, if you have specific needs and those vacancies that they have listed don't work for you, or for some reason because of your disability needs that you are required to live alone and that you need to live alone, then alternative housing options have to be explored. You also have the right to choose your furniture and decorations as long as they comply with your lease or agreement. So generally you can get whatever you want. If your landlord has a rule that you can't have strobe lights in your apartment, you may not be able to have strobe lights in your apartment, but generally you are able to choose what furniture you want where you live. And if you're moving to a new waiver home, just say I'm with RCM and I'm living in Fort Taunton Apartments and I decide I don't want to live anymore there and I want to move over to Southeast DC and I'm moving to a new apartment, I have the right to take my furniture and my decorations with me. And next slide, please. Okay, so you also have, it's very important that you have freedom and support for your personal schedules for what you want to do and to freedom to do, to live your own life and to choose your own activities. And so you have the right to choose your own activities and who you want to spend time with. If you are living with somebody else and they say, today we're going to the Smithsonian Museum and you don't want to go, you don't have to go. You have the choice where you go and who you go with. You have the freedom to go out whenever and wherever you want. If you say, I'm hungry and I want to go out, You have the right to do that. There may be certain situations where you have some restrictions if you have a person-centered modification. And again, Rodé will get to that, but generally people have the right to live their lives just like people who are not receiving waiver services. Staff should accompany you if necessary, if you need to go out, if you want to visit with family and friends and you need help, or you want to go grocery shopping, or you want to go to the bank, or whatever you want to do. Staff should be helping you so that you're getting your needs met. You also have the right to eat whenever and wherever you prefer. So staff should not be saying in your apartment, well, we only eat 3 meals a day and you've already had your meal, and so no ice cream for you, or you want to eat at 2 o'clock. No, we're eating at 1 o'clock. You have the right to eat when you want to eat and eat what you want to eat. Again, that may be subject to a person-centered modification in certain circumstances, but generally, you don't always have to eat healthy. I know I don't always eat healthy. People have the rights to make their own choices, just like people who aren't in waiver settings. Okay, next slide. Okay, you also have the right to visitors. And I know this comes up a lot. I hear this a lot when people call my office, as that they are told that they can't have people visiting them, or they can only have people visiting for a certain period of time. People under the settings rule have to have the right to have the people that they love and care about and want to be around visit them at their homes. And so the right to visitor means, unless, again, there's a person-centered modification, that people can have visitors at all times, whether or not you live alone or you live with someone else. Now, that being the case, it certainly is good to be a nice roommate and to talk to your roommate and have your roommate talk to you about what makes sense and what works for that person on visitors. If I'm someone who goes to bed at 10 o'clock and I'm living with someone, I'm probably going to ask my roommate, hey, would you mind not having anyone come over past 10? Or if you do, can you keep it down? And that may be something that you work out with your roommate, but generally you do have the right to have visitors at all times. It is possible that you will have an agreement, a residential agreement, or a lease that limits the amount of time that a visitor can be at your place. For example, some leases applies to people with disabilities and without will say if somebody stays at your house more than 3 times a week, that person is considered a tenant and then has to go through the leasing process. So it's possible visitors may be limited that way, but it's important that the visitors are not limited any more than if the person was not receiving DDA services. You can also have visitors in all areas of your home. If you want to have them in your bedroom, in your living room, in the kitchen, helping you do laundry, whatever that is, you have the right to have visitors with you wherever you want to meet with them. Next slide. You also certainly have the right to, of course, you need to have a physically accessible home. So if you have a disability that requires physical changes made in the house, it's very important that you have those changes. And it's important that you not just be able to reach parts of the house. Maybe you can just get to your bedroom and the bathroom. You have the right to be able to get to all areas, whether that's the kitchen, the living room, your closet, of course, the bathroom, the laundry room. If you want to do your own laundry, you absolutely have to have the right to be able to access the laundry room. If home modifications are needed, just say you're living in a place and that modifications are needed, you should reach out to your service coordinator or your provider and talk to them about what you believe needs to get done, and they can explore resources with you. It may be that DDS pays for that. It might be the residential provider. They may refer you to the Safe at Home program that can help make changes to people's homes to make them accessible. And sometimes if you don't know, like, I'm having a hard time getting around, or something is not as easy as I believe it should be, and you don't know what you need, you can ask your service coordinator or your provider to arrange for what's called a clinical assessment, or somebody like a physical therapist or occupational therapist to really talk to you and do an assessment and figure out what could help you and make your space that you're living in more accessible, or maybe help you get adaptive equipment that helps you get around easier. Next slide. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Rodé because I keep mentioning that person-centered modification, and she's going to get into what that's all about.
All right, thank you, Sandy. So providers have a responsibility to protect the health and safety of the individuals they support. A person-centered modification, or a PCM, is put in place when any of the specific rights that are outlined in the ACBS setting rules pose a risk to the person or someone else. That is a risk to the person's health and safety or someone else's health and safety. The person and their support team will work together to determine if a person-centered modification is necessary. The person must be given the opportunity to consent to any modifications. This means that the modification must be included in the person's individual support plan. A person-centered modification cannot be enforced or implemented without the person's agreement. As Sandy mentioned earlier, these modifications only apply to people who reside in residential or day settings where they're receiving waiver services. Person-centered modifications cannot be applied in a person's natural home setting. Okay. So now we're going to go over 2 examples of person-centered modifications. The first example is John. John has a history of financial exploitation, and a person-centered modification was put in place to assist him with managing his funds. So John often gives his debit card to friends and family to make online purchases. John is concerned that his account is often left in the negative and he is unable to pay for things that he needs. So John's support team met and John developed a weekly budget. John agreed to leave his debit card at home and take only cash to work. John agreed to having his provider manage his checking accounts. So all of this was included in the person-centered modification and the person in John's ISP. And the restriction is reviewed by the team at least annually or as needed. Okay. So now this is our second example of a person-centered modification, and this modification was put in place to limit Jane's access to food due to increasing concerns about her health. So Jane has a medical condition that makes her hungry all the time. She often overeats and then gets sick. Jane was recently diagnosed with diabetes, and Jane worked with her staff and nutritionists to create a meal plan and a snack schedule. Jane agreed to let staff check her room daily to make sure that she is not storing food in her room. And these restrictions were included in her person-centered modification plan and her ISP. And the team reviewed the plan at least annually or as needed. So the Providers Human Rights Committee reviews all person-centered modification plans and make recommendations for or against the modification that's being proposed. The discussion by the Human Rights Committee is then shared with the person and their support team, and the team can decide to agree with the proposed modification or disagree with the modification. If the person or their support team disagrees with the proposed modification, the person's service coordinator must ensure that the person's ISP is amended to reflect any changes that the team made to the recommendations that were made by the provider's HRC. Because there are some times that the team may agree on some parts of the proposed modification, and they may not agree on some other parts. So only the parts that the team and the person agrees to will be included in the ISP and be implemented by the team. There are some other ways that a person's rights may be restricted outside of a person-centered modification. For an example, a behavior support plan can restrict a person's right. A behavior support plan is a written plan to help prevent or reduce behaviors that may seriously limit a person's activities, relationships, or behaviors that may pose a danger to the person or others. So a behavior support plan is considered more restrictive than a person-centered modification. The plan is developed and monitored by a licensed clinician, which could be a psychologist or a clinical social worker. A behavior support plan involves analyzing the behavior, identifying triggers, and also implementing different strategies to address those behaviors. A behavior support plan requires approval by DDS's Restrictive Control Review Committee, RCRC, whereas a person-centered modification plan does not need to go through RCRC A person-centered modification plan is reviewed and approved by the provider's Human Rights Committee. And again, if a person does not have a BSP and there is only a certain part of their rights that need to be restricted due to health and safety concerns, instead of implementing a behavior support plan, the team can consider a person-centered modification. There are some other, again, this continues from the previous slide, but there are some other ways that a person's rights can be restricted. Sometimes a person may have a court order that limits their rights, that has, certain probation criterias or other criterias to keep them safe and to keep the community safe. So that must also be taken into consideration. Also, if a person has a guardian or conservator, depending on the limits that are set in the orders that was assigned by the judge, the guardian may have some say into what the person can and can't do and what the limits are to that person's rights. So the person has the right to be educated by their support team about their rights, about any limitation that the team may think of imposing. And if a person does have a behavior support plan, the person definitely needs to be educated on their behaviors and the reason why the team is proposing a behavior support plan. And if the person is not in agreement with the behavior support plan or any type of restriction and feel that their rights are being violated, they have the option of seeking assistance through Quality Trust for individuals, to seeking assistance from Quality Trust or Disability Rights DC. So that was the end of our presentation on the setting rules. Now we're going to do a quick knowledge check, just a true or false questions that we're going to ask, and then you could type your responses in the chat or you could unmute yourself and respond. So the first question, true or false, a residency agreement or lease does not need to mention eviction protections for individuals in waiver settings. False, false. Yes, that is correct. The residency agreement or the lease should clearly state the eviction protection that a person has, and that, like Sandy stated, it has to be similar to the protections that are offered to people who do not receive services. All right. Number two, true or false, all staff supporting you in your home can have copies of the keys to your bedroom. Okay, let's see some answers. False, false. Yes, that is false. Only staff members who need to support you in your bedroom or bathroom should have keys, and you are always able to close and lock those doors unless, again, there's a person-centered modification for health and safety reasons that you can't have your doors locked.
That's good job. I thought people would get that one wrong.
I know. All right. Number three, the staff supporting you in your supportive living apartment are concerned you have recently gained 10 pounds. To help you, they can limit you to only one snack a day. True or false? All right, good. A lot of answers coming in. False.
I'm glad people marked out as being false, because if you're a diabetic or you have other health issues, one snack a day might not cut it.
That's right, Thomas. So you have the right to access food at any time, but there are some times that your access to food may be limited, but that has to be implemented through a person-centered modification. It can't be a blanket limit to your access to food.
And the person would have to agree to it.
Yes. All right. Number 4, a person-centered modification can be applied in any setting, including a person's natural home. Okay, we're getting kind of mixed responses, true and false. Okay. So again, the person-centered modification can only be applied to a residential or day waiver setting. It cannot be applied in a person's natural home. Okay. And the last question, a person-centered modification is reviewed and approved by DDS RCRC before implementation. Again, we're getting kind of mixed answers, true and false. The answer is false. A person-centered modification is reviewed and approved by the provider's Human Rights Committee. And the person in the team must be in agreement with the recommendations before it can be implemented.
Good job, everyone. Looks like we have a
Yeah.
hand raised. Sam, did you have a question? I don't know if
Yeah,
I can unmute you.
This is Sam. I'm from Quality Trust. I wanted to get a little bit more clarity on your position regarding guardians and their role in the person-centered modifications process. One thing that I'm a little bit concerned about is the possibility that a guardian might think that they can just say they want a person-centered modification without meeting all of the other criteria. So I wanted to make it clear that, at least in my opinion of the rule, a guardian can have the legal authority to consent to the modification, but you still would need to go through the process of proving the need for the modification. So if a guardian simply says, I don't think this person should have access to food at every time, you wouldn't necessarily want to have that put into a person's person-centered plan unless you can also demonstrate a need for that, such that that's an appropriate restriction. And so I just wanted to make sure that, that's my position. And is that also DDS's position?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Any modification, you definitely will need justification to support it. The reason for the modification is because the behavior poses a serious risk to the person's health and safety, not just because, that's what the guardian wants. And the person has the right to appeal if they do not agree with the recommendations that are being made by their guardian or the support team.
Hey,
Right.
Brittany, it's Mark. Thanks, Sam, for bringing that up. That's something I'd want to go back and talk to Neha about. She's actually on leave today, so is Emily. A guardian, and I saw a conservator in there too, but a guardian is a court-appointed person. I don't know that a committee has the ability to tell them they can or cannot do something. So
Well, the committee is deciding what services DDS is providing.
No, they're not. They're
It's not
deciding
about-
whether or not we can do a modification to those services that violates the HCBS settings rule.
Right.
The
so the
ISP
guardian
determines
can't
what the
dictate-
services are.
The guardian's not empowered to require DDS to violate the settings rule by implementing a person-centered modification that doesn't have justification.
Well, so what you're doing is you're looking at whether or not a person has a right to a specific provision of services in a certain way. And to the extent a guardian is making decisions on that person's behalf, it's a question of whether or not the committee can say whether they can or can't do it. It's something I would want to talk to Neha about and get her position.
Okay.
We
I'm happy to talk to Neha about it. I
Yeah.
feel very strongly that the guardian cannot require the provision of services that's inconsistent with federal law. And this is a federal law. that is requiring a certain criteria to be met before there's a modification.
Yeah, but there are provisions for doing modifications. We can talk about it.
Yeah, and I'd certainly like to be involved in that conversation too. I think it's also important to note that if the, the guardian may have certainly input regarding if it's a health and safety issue, just say it's something involving food and the person has, for example, Prader-Willi syndrome and has issues being able to decide how much food or when to stop eating versus the person wants to have a visitor over and the guardian says no, and they're just a healthcare guardian. So I think that it's, I think it would behoove us to have a conversation about how that will proceed in all different circumstances.
Right. But, Sandy, when you mentioned Prader-Willi, I mean, that would give rise to justification under the rule, right? You have a person-centered justification for a departure. Whereas if a guardian is just saying, I don't want this person to ever be unsupervised, then unless they can also articulate a person-centered justification for a departure from the rule where the person really, has genuine, that you can document in the plan, then, then the rule is not satisfied.
I agree.
That's all I'm saying.
Can I just say, wonderful legal arguments amongst our 3 lawyers there. Roday, I thought, did a wonderful job of responding to how the agency does and will respond, which seemed to be pretty consistent with what you had asked for, Sam, and the statements you made. So Mark, if you and Neha and Sam and Sandy want to have a follow-up conversation, please do. The rest of us are going to move on right now and answer. There was another question in the chat from someone who said, there's a high-functioning mother of 5 who declines staff monitoring in her home, compliance with health and wellness standards. Would a modification be made for independence from DDS/provider monitoring?
This is a very good question. It sounds very much so like this person is really able to function absent DDS services and has made decisions that would indicate that they're functioning independent of those services. And in that case, we would do everything in our power to support this person with natural supports and not continue to, for lack of a better word, force them to receive service, because it sounds like this person is answering the question of whether they need services by not agreeing to accept those services. So I'd be very interested in following up more in detail for this case. And, just as a preference for me, the term high functioning is not something we would use in describing the person that we serve. So yeah, we'll definitely, if we can get someone to, share with me 202-730-1618 more in detail about this specific case, I'll make sure my service plan coordination group supports this person with their independence and, not wanting to comply or adhere, comply is bad, or adhere to the services and supports others, it seems like, think that they need. So this is a very good case to talk about.
Right, it would be the opposite of what we're discussing here. What we generally are discussing are people who are in a residential placement and you're trying to, if you're per person-centered modification, you're putting restrictions on them that is not what the settings rule sort of stands for. But this example more sounds like you actually, the person is already getting privacy and just wants everyone to just completely stay away. And so the settings rule would certainly say that their privacy rights should be respected. And I understand that DDS will want to explore whether or not this person actually needs supports. But the settings rule would say that they should have the right to, their own space, their own time, and not letting people in if they don't want people in. But I understand what Winslow was saying, that it's more complicated than that. Or at least it sounds like it from the fact pattern.
Thank you. And it looks like, and I'm recognizing also with the time, we do still have 2 more folks who are going to present today. There were a couple of comments, I don't think questions, so I'm just going to read the comments for people who might not have access to the chat. And please, people, make sure when you use initials for things that you spell it out, because some of us don't know what those are. The PCM, person-centered model. Thank you. The person-centered modification would ideally have options for healthy snacks that may not have negative impacts on the person's health and weight, and include an educational component about how foods impact their health. Good suggestion. I think the interdisciplinary team will have to meet to make a final decision before a modification is implemented.
That's correct, yes.
And that was it. Thank you very much. Very informative. I think we could have spent like a whole hour and a half just talking about the settings rule. I think the DC has made great progress in this area. And I was really glad that you were able to do this so that we make sure that everyone understands the efforts that are being made and what people's rights are to be fully integrated into the community, because that's what we all want to see. And kind of along those lines, next up, we have a presentation from, I'm just looking to see, are the people able to share? From Eric, from two folks from RCM, Erica Thomas and Thomas Mangrum. Thank you. Sorry, Thomas. And I'm pretty sure you all have a slide deck, right? And you're sharing your screen. Wonderful. And so in terms of, you know, people being fully included, also, how are people fully included in all the activities happening in the community? So I'll turn it over to Erica Thomas.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thomas, are you there?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So like Andy said, we're going to talk a bit about celebrating LGBTQIA Pride Month. And I'm joined by Thomas Mangrum. And what we did was, as we all heard, sadly, Thomas lost a family member, so we weren't sure if he was going to be available to come today. So we actually recorded some responses from Thomas in the presentation. So Thomas and I talked, and what we agreed to, I'll go through the presentation, and on the parts where he speaks, if there's something that he wanted to add after that, then he would. So let's get started. So with just a quick introduction around Pride Month, we'll get into, we'll talk about LGBTQIA Pride Month, what it is, why the United States celebrates it, and how you can celebrate here in DC. So just really quickly, Pride Month is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer Pride Month. It's celebrated each year in the United States. And it is to honor the Stonewall Uprising that happened in 1969 in Manhattan. And this was a tipping point for the gay liberation movement in the United States. And it started off as a Gay Pride Day and then grew into being Pride Month. And so we have different celebrations. So it might look like Pride picnics, it might look like parades, parties. I don't know if anyone was able to participate in DC Pride, which was earlier this month. And so tons and tons of people all around the United States and around the world actually celebrate Pride Month. And the United States celebrates it again to honor what happened during the 1969 Stonewall riots. And then I wanted to get into, for Thomas, and we'll see this on the next slide, and he's going to tell us what pride means to him. And just let me know if you can hear Thomas.
Pride Month means to me for us to be able to come together, show love to each other, and be supportive of each other. Because like some of us is not around, each other all the time. And it's very important for us to let each other know that we're in this together and show the respect to each other that we might not get from other people.
Thomas, did you want to add anything to what you said?
No, not right now.
All right.
Pride is important to me to show other people. We should support people with IDD.
Give me 1 second. Something's
Pride. We should support people with IDD during Pride Month or during any other time of the year, because a lot of us get taken advantage of by other people that might want to rape us or do stuff, and we not being educated and know that we can't say no, or have you as well as saying yes, and we can get together with someone the way that we want to get together with them and be treated with respect. Because when you have a disability overall, people tend not to respect you, and they tend to like treat you like you're a child, although you might be older than they are. So, and also making sure people realize we have a right to have a sex life like everybody else do. Because a lot of times people treat us like we must be sexless because of our disability. We don't supposed to have sex. We don't supposed to have the need to go to a club or a strip joint or what have you because we have a disability. And that's wrong. And that's wrong because we deserve to have everything in our life as other people might have. And we deserve to have the love and respect in our lives like other people seem to want and they think that they deserve. So it shouldn't be no difference. So when it comes to the DD community, it's very important that people recognize us and know, although we might need some help, we're not less than they are. We are equals. So needing help do not make you less than someone else. So having that support and having people help us, that's very important.
And so let's talk a bit about sexual orientation and gender identity and what that means. So when we're looking at sexual orientation, that means like who you are attracted to and who you want to have, who you choose to have relationships with. It's people who you are drawn to romantically, emotionally, and sexually. So your orientation is when we see the letters, the LGBTQIA+, that is what your sexual orientation would be. Your gender identity is pretty much it's who you identify with, who you think you are. So it's your concept of yourself. Do you consider yourself to be male or female, a blend of both, or neither? So it depends on the person. It's up to the person on how they choose to identify. And then with gender expression, think about that as how your appearance and how you look to other people. So that can look like what your clothing looks like, your body characteristics, or your voice. And what you look like might not conform to what society deems is what you should look like or what you should sound like. And so sometimes this can get a bit difficult to understand and grasp. So I like to use what's called the gender unicorn. So this is just a unicorn. It is just that. And when you're thinking about gender identity, as we see the little bubble with the rainbow in it, it's who do you think you are? And so that again is male, female, girl, male, man, boy, other genders. And then with the gender expression, so the little dots on the outside, So that's how you show yourself to the world. You know, what clothes do you wear? How do you adorn your body? You know, what do you look like to other people? And then the kind of like the DNA sequence that we see there around private parts, that was the sex that you were assigned at birth. So how were you, when you were born, were you born were you born male or were you born female? So how were you born? And then you see the two hearts, and that's who you're attracted to. So we had talked about that earlier. So who people are romantically attracted to, who people are physically attracted to. And again, this is all a person's choice. We are not here to dictate how a person should live their lives. People are not going to go to hell. People shouldn't be looked at differently because of who they choose to identify as and who they want to be. And I think that Thomas summed that up and said that for us a little earlier.
And making sure for those who believe in God, God don't make mistakes. So a person being gay is not a mistake.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see LGBTQIA, and those letters mean lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual. And so just really briefly, lesbian usually means a woman whose primary sexual and affectional orientation is towards people of the same gender. So a woman, someone who identifies as woman, wants to be romantically involved with another woman. With gay, a sexual and affectional orientation, again, towards people of the same gender. Bisexual, a person of the same gender and towards other people regardless of their gender. As transgender is a person who was assigned, when we saw our gender unicorn earlier, a person who was assigned a certain sex at birth and they don't identify with what they were assigned at birth. So again, with that sexual expression, how they show themselves to the world, it might be different, or it might not be, again, what society thinks this person should look like. Queer is, so previously it had been used in a negative way, but people are starting to embrace queer more and more. And so it's more of to self-identify with someone. And so not all people who identify under the whole LGBTQIA like umbrella, some people identify as queer and others do not. So again, it depends on the person. Then questioning is someone who's exploring their own gender identity, gender expression, or their sexual orientation. And then intersex is a wide range of natural body variations that do not fit, again, neatly into that little box that society likes to paint for people. And so people have different definitions of what male or female might look like. And so again, it's up to the person and how they choose to identify. And then asexual is very broad, and it is a feeling of varying degrees of sexual attraction or desires for certain people. And so just a quick guess what? And if you all will indulge me in your own space with your mute on, or if you want to indulge me in the chat, like with a what? So like, guess what? What? Some people with IDD identify as LGBTQIA. Another guess what? You might be supporting someone who, did someone say something? Was someone indulging me and saying what?
I gave you a what? I thought somebody
Yes.
was joining.
Thank you. So you might be supporting someone who identifies under the LGBTQIA umbrella. And then another guess what? We must recognize, yes, thank you. You must recognize and respect the choices of people with IDD, and our job is to support them to live their best lives. And so I have a couple of questions for you all. So I would love to see your answers in the chat. And then I also presented these questions to Thomas as well. So while he is speaking to us in his videos, you can type your responses in the chat. So how can DDS support people with IDD who identify as LGBTQIA? And then thinking of yourself and your role, how can you support people with IDD who identify as LGBTQIA? So I'll let that sit with you for a minute so that you can think about it. And then I'll play Thomas's videos, and I would love to see your responses in the chat.
Yeah, we can support people that that's noted to be part of the family, You know, I can't remember all them alphabets. But anyway, but like we could like start support groups to help people. Cause like with their families or their friends of the family, what have you, might be putting them down for being gay, talking about you going to hell or what have you. And we could like show them churches like they believe in God and I believe in God. So there's churches out there that's not bigoted. And I don't go to any church that would talk against me being gay, try to shame me, try to put me down. So there's churches out there that don't believe in that. And there's churches out there that do not believe you're gonna go to hell because you're gay. So that's basically for the bigots to put out there, because you always have people that want to measure their life by how they putting you down. So they think that they're better than you, their life is worth living. So they would constantly hang on to that without realizing, regardless of what they believe or not, they should treat you with love and respect, because they don't want you to force what you believe off on them. So why do they think they have the right to force what they believe off on you? So having the groups that support you and help you to make it through life, what have you, and you coming together and you knowing that you are loved, because you stay around your family that constantly putting you down, you could wind up thinking that you are hated and nobody loves you. So coming together and having support groups that shows you that you are loved, you know, and what have you, that can help you go on with life, and that can help you mentally. Because when you start feeling like nobody loves you, that could cause you to do something to somebody or do something to yourself or both. So it's very important. Yes. DDS and other service providers, they can support people that's they say supporting this in the gay community, what have you, with knowing that they will have to, if somebody tell them they're getting ready to come out of the closet, like case managers or what have you, that case managers should know about different support groups that they can go to, because having somebody to where you could run to for support if your family stands against you, that's very important. Because a lot of times family members will stand against you and cause you to do something to somebody or yourself, and family members won't take the blame for that. So if you kill yourself, they go like, oh, Satan did it. But they don't realize they was the cause of that happening, because they show you love and respect, regardless of whether or not they agree with how you live your life or not. You might not have killed yourself. You might not have killed someone else, what have you. So having a support group that you know you can go to, that's very important after you come out the closet. Because coming out of the closet is more besides just telling people your business. That's a lot to it. And you got to be prepared to be able to handle it. But sometimes, even when you think you are prepared to handle it, you might find out that you're not. So having these support groups that you go to, what have you, and let them know when you're going to come out, what time you're going to come out, and maybe having somebody come to pick you up and take you and show you the love and respect that your family didn't show you. That's very important for the different disability groups to be aware of, because coming out of the closet could literally mean the difference between life and death. And especially if your family is violent towards the community, the lesbians and gay people, what have you, you need to let them know in case something happens to you, who the police could look at and question or what have you, because they shouldn't get away with putting their hands on you like that. Yes.
And then I wanted to throw in a quick plug for pronouns and then making sure that we're using inclusive language. So I think that we're starting to see this a lot. So I'm seeing it a lot, for example, on people's email signatures, on Zoom, people will say, will put their pronouns next to their names. And so pronouns are words that we use to refer to ourselves. So they'll look like they, them, theirs, she, hers, she, her, hers, he, him, his, or again, whatever a person chooses. And it's very, very important that we respect a person's pronouns. So even when, you know, we look at a person and we assume by looking at that person and what society thinks who this person is, we're not going to assume a person's pronouns. And then I hear it a lot of times, like, well, what if I don't know a person's pronouns? Like, what should I do? And the easiest thing to do is just ask. And when you're asking, that's showing respect. You're not assuming, you're not, you know, using words that a person doesn't choose. You're not, you know, you want to make sure that we're being respectful. So again, how do you ask? You can simply ask a person, well, what pronouns do you use? Or what pronouns would you like for me to use? Or if you use incorrect pronouns and a person corrects you, make a mental note and use those pronouns that that person chooses. And then using more inclusive language. So a lot of times someone will say like, hey guys, or how's it going ladies? And, you know, being mindful of how people identify, we want to make sure that we're using more inclusive language. So that might look like, hey everyone, you know, how's it going? How's everyone doing? Instead of, you know, the hey guys or the hey ladies. And then I'm a big fun facts person. I love just facts about different things. So the LGBT rights movement, again, we had talked about that in 1969, it kicked off with the Stonewall riots in New York. And then the rainbow flag was designed in 1978 by Gilbert Baker. And so when we're looking at the rainbow flag, pink represents sexuality, red is for healing, yellow is for sun, green is for serenity with nature, turquoise is for art, indigo is for harmony, and violet is for spirit. President Obama announced the designation of the first national monument to LGBTQIA+ rights in 2016, and that's going to be at the site of the Stonewall riots. Capitol Pride was originally called Gay Pride Day, and it was a one-day block party in DC. And then DC Black Pride is the first official Black gay pride event in the United States. And I'm joined by my dog. And then if you're looking for any activities or anything to do during Pride Month, we're coming to the end of June, but if anyone is interested in celebrating or if they have folks that they support and they want to celebrate some local activities, we have Arlington Pride, and that's going to be this weekend, Rockville Pride. The Gay Men's Chorus of Washington, I highly recommend them. They are absolutely wonderful. They have an event called Potomac Fever. There is Pride in the Plaza at over in Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring. There's a drag brunch down on the wharf. There's trivia night at the Portrait Gallery. And we have Wind Down Pride Month on June 28th. So these are just some of the local events that are going on this month to close out Pride Month.
Hold up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Can you make sure I have all them dates and engagements so I can be able to attend? And I got to go because my grief is overcoming me, thinking about my sister, and I still got to finish packing. So I'm glad that I was able to be in the meeting. Well, much as I was able to be in the meeting, but I got to go.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate you. I'll call you later, okay?
All right.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Thomas.
All right. Yes. And pride is about you doing the things that you know that makes you happy. So if you have some activities that you did before that you not doing now, so when you start going through depression, think about the things that you did before that made you happy and do them. And only be around people that give you joy, not the people that bring you down, constantly bring you down, and what have you. Only be around people that give you joy and you give them joy and you happy or what have you. And also realizing Just because somebody's related to you do not mean you have to be around them. Some people you got to love from afar, whether or not they a friend or somebody you want to be a friend, because you got to love them from afar, they're not your friends. But family will always be your family, but you can still love them. Don't show no hatred towards them, although they might show you hatred. But you could choose who you're going to be around in your family. Do not allow people to shame you or make you feel bad about yourself. Do not be around people that try to judge your happiness based upon what they want or what have you, because some people could say, well, I know you're not happy with your life because I'm not happy with your life. Well, what does it have to do with that? Because there's a lot of people that commit suicide or do stuff every year and wind up in facilities for people that are going to hurt themselves. And the family going like, I thought she was happy. I thought he was happy because they made me happy. It's a possibility that you can make other people happy while you are miserable yourself. So realize pride is knowing that you are responsible for making sure that you are happy. Because other people could care less about you being happy, just as long as you're doing stuff to make them happy. So that's what pride is all about. You loving yourself, you having respect for yourself, when others might not have that for you. Happy Pride to you all, and many more. And every day should be Happy Pride, not just during Pride Month.
So Erica, there are two questions in the chat.
Okay.
And I'm going back from the most recent up. So it says, is it more appropriate to use the Progress Pride flag to show support, or does it matter?
I would say, for me, it doesn't matter. And this question came up at home in my own household. In my neighborhood, there are a lot of flags that are being flown, and so we've been kind of like figuring out, like, okay, so which flag do we want to do? The Progress Pride flag, or do we want? So I think that it's your preference, or the person who supported, it's their preference, which flag that they choose. So I would explore it that way.
Thank you. And next, do only people who are gay or these other categories have the desired pronouns on their signature page, or can it be used by anyone?
Anyone can tell us their pronouns. If you choose to do that and you don't identify under that umbrella, you can certainly do it. So it is all your preference. So anyone could do it.
And lastly, these aren't questions, but for the benefit of people who are on their phones and can't see the chat, you did have a question about what things can people do, and lots of people wrote in, so I want to make sure and read all those out so that people on the phone can hear. Be welcoming and respectful of people and their individual choices. And it's not scrolling. Help people learn about sex, embrace differences. By respecting people's choices, treat them the way you would want someone else to treat you. Do not judge. We can empower people to be who they are and to express themselves in a variety of ways that feel comfortable to them. Help people live their best lives. We can take people to gay bars, show people support and love, accept people for who they are, respect and accept their personalities and values, ensure that all of our spaces are safe. As providers, we can learn more about this community and expose staff to the community so that they support people in the way that the people need. Wow, there were more than I recognized.
These are wonderful.
Follow the person-centered principles, people-first philosophies. Ensure Those who support IDD community are clear on the settings rules, which is mandated to support individual choices, including diversity. Including this in training material. Take people to see or support them in participating in annual outspoken event through story district. Take people to see or support them in participating in the annual outspoken event through Story District. It's an evening storytelling through Pride. There's a link in the chat for people. Just a comment, this has been an excellent presentation. Thanks to Erica and Thomas, especially thanks to Thomas for coming through, even given his circumstances this week.
Yes.
Lots of thank yous to Thomas.
I'll make sure I give him those words.
Great presentation.
And just if anyone,
Ah,
no, I
we
was just going to say, if
several
anyone,
people- Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry. No, I thought you were ending. Keep going.
I did too, and I got more. We support several people in supported living. They attended several activities for Black Pride and Capital Pride. We also support them in connecting to other LGBTQ organizations. And that is
Wonderful.
the end. So that's really great input. I'm glad to hear so many suggestions from people.
Is there a way to print these out? And because these were wonderful.
Charlisa,
Can we
When
print
we-
them out and share them somehow?
I'll capture the chat box.
we'll
Awesome.
be
Thank you.
capturing the chat, and then when we post this, we'll be able to post it along with our monthly forum.
Wonderful,
You're
wonderful.
right, they're great suggestions.
Yeah. And so if anyone has any questions for me, I can put my email address into the chat box as well. Thank you all for having us. Everybody take care and happy Pride.
Happy Pride Month, and thank you very much. Have a great weekend, everyone. Rainy out there, but it's wonderful for all the things that needed the rain.